Got earrings.
Aichgwel, Iquanasilam Nama. Good evening. Welcome to the Business Committee meeting on Wednesday, May 8th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that it is with great respect and humility we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardships, and expressions of reciprocity. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? If you could just type in the chat, that would be great. Any changes of order? Okay, seeing none, I'll seek a motion to approve the agenda. Greg? Seconded by Chantel. All in favor, if you're opposed, please type in the chat. Thank you. I'll seek a motion to approve the minutes, that the minutes of the Business Committee meeting held on April 10th, 2024 be approved. Chantel and Tanya? Anyone opposed? No, okay, motion carries. So moving on to item number 7, presentations. QP Local 606 President Jeff Vertanen is going to present to us on their requests for the 2024-2025 budgets. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'd like to start. I'm coming to you from the Zaminas territory, and I thank them for allowing me to live and work here. All right. Hey, everybody, thanks for allowing me to give you QP's take on the 2024-25 preliminary budget. I'll try to keep it as concise as possible, as I'm sure you probably have a few Canucks fans here who are looking at the game time. So start things out. I'd like to acknowledge and appreciate that no major cuts to support staff positions. We hear what's going on in some of the other districts, and we're definitely glad that we're not in that position. And we also want to commend the board, Laura, Mark, Tanya, the finance department, in improving on their goal to spend today's dollars on today's students, I think as Mark likes to put it. I'm sure we'll always debate on what the proper size for contingency fund is, but you know what, we're seeing improvements in this area, and you know, just want to acknowledge that. Okay, all that being said though, QP still has a few concerns with the preliminary budget, so I'll get to them. While we're happy to see no major cuts, we're concerned that there's still no investments in some really key areas. No surprise, guys, EAs need more hours. It's a full stop. We believe that all EA positions should be 35 hours a week. We know it's not financially realistic to do that in one budget, or probably even 2 or 3. But you know what? We can be investing a little bit each time. Daycare expansion that use EAs to do work, that is a good start. But we just need to do more. We're seeing more and more EAs leaving the profession. They're getting burnt out. They're facing violent incidents. And you know, many of them are doing it for 27 hours a week. I just talked last week to a newer EA, and she's already leaving the district. And she told me that she wishes that she would have A, knew how hard the job was, but B, knew how little hours she was getting, because she probably would have taken something different at school. She's not the only one who feels that way. So we feel that this issue has been ignored for way too long, and we would like more money invested in our EAs. Another concern is just the wage gap for our trades. We talked about this, I think, as early as last month here in this committee. We talked about how hard it is to find all trades, but mostly mechanics and HVAC seem to be the big ones. They will come work here for a little bit less an hour, but when you're talking $10 an hour, it's nearly impossible to recruit those people. So we just feel we need to do better here too. The last thing I really want to talk about, and it's something that's been happening for probably as long as I've been here, and it continues to happen today. And this is about, it's we call it incremental creep. And it happens on the backs of your support staff. So you can call it incremental creep, you can call it chipping away, whatever, right? But what they are is that they're cuts that don't necessarily show up in the budget. So for example, this time, the district wants to reorganize our community school coordinators' jobs into something else. And look, we get it. We get reorganizing. Times change, things change, we get that. But in this case, so we have 5 community school coordinators, and we're going to, the district wants to reorganize that to 1 community school coordinator and 4 other support workers. So when you look at it in the budget, that looks like a wash, right? 5 equals 5. But in this instance, it doesn't, because those 5 community school coordinators they're all 12-month positions. So 4 of those new positions are only going to be 10 months. So that's like 8 months of CUPE work that just gone by what we call that incremental creep. You don't notice it in the budget. It's even more concerning because we don't have that many 12-month jobs, and the ones we do are mostly male orientated. This department was very female dominated, and now we've lost 4 12-month jobs. And now we also learned that we might not be giving replacement EAs that extra hour that we negotiated last contract. So there's another example of little cuts that just don't show up on the budget. Now, to be fair, staff told us that there is still work going on behind the scenes, so this isn't totally set in stone yet, but I just wanted to point it out to everyone that when we talk about incremental creep and the chipping away, there's a couple examples right there. You know what, I'm going to wrap this up. We just want to say this, like, we don't envy being in your position. I'm a town councillor, I get it. There's so many different areas that are screaming for the dollars, and there's only so many dollars to go around. I get it. CUPE's biggest wish is that, provincial governments fully and properly funds public education, especially in the K-12 sector. I know QBBC is doing a lot of work. I know trustees, you're doing a lot of advocacy work. It's one of our common goals that we have, and I hope we continue to work that way, because that's going to be the biggest change if we can get more funding from the provincial government. No surprise to you. But until that happens, I mean, we can still move forward. We can still make modest improvements year by year. Just couple quick numbers here. To give every EA an extra hour per week, it would cost in the ballpark of about $300,000. It's only 0.16% of a budget our size. If you want to say maybe get the HVAC wage closer to the BC average, say moving it up by about $5 an hour, it costs $10,400 to do that. I mean, it feels like that's a rounding error in our budget. So, I mean, I could go on and on, but I'm just going to leave it there. I just want to give you those 2 examples of the kind of small step improvements. We need others, of course, too, but those are a couple that we're throwing at, and we just like to see those still at least small improvements happening until adequate public education funding. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jeff. Does anyone have any questions? Chantal?
Actually, I think I'm going to ask this during the budget talk, actually. I'm going to ask this during the budget question. It'll just sort of be a clarifying question in regards to the additional hour that were given last year to EAs, and that changed this year, perhaps. Unless, Jeff, you could sort of expand on it just a tiny little bit, if you could, and what you meant by that.
Sure. We're still working through it, but what happened was, I guess, I don't know how, but during bargaining, maybe we missed the mark on the estimate. So we're not going to have enough. We're working to at least get enough for the regular EA jobs, but the replacement to replace if they're off, we just don't feel that there's enough money there right now. So, of course, we believe that there's ways to fix that, but we could talk about that elsewhere.
Okay, I still don't think I understand fully what it is that you're meaning. Replacement hours. I don't think I'm catching it here.
Okay, if I'm an EA and I get the extra hour a week and I'm off, my replacement is looking like my replacement won't get that extra hour.
Okay, great. Okay. So that's something that you're working on with,
Yes,
Yeah.
we're working on that and the community school coordinators, yes.
okay, great. Okay, thank you. I see Mark popped on, so I don't know if you want to add to that or not. But
I can address it more fully when we get to the budget as well.
fantastic, thank you.
Thanks. Is there anyone else that has a question for Jeff? Okay, I am not seeing anyone else. So thank you so much, Jeff, for your presentation. And we will move on to our next presenter, which is the NDTA president, Jo Cornthwaite, and she's going to have a discussion about the NDTA's priorities for the upcoming budget.
Thank you
Got
so
this,
much.
Jo.
Okay. All right. So good evening, folks. As Leanne mentioned, my name is Jo Cornthwaite. I'm the president of the Nanaimo District Teachers Association, and I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Snuneymuxw people. So, let's see how we do. Our core belief is that student learning is best served when adequate staffing exists at all levels of the organization and the necessary infrastructure supports are in place. And so that's something we bring to the table when we are considering the budget. We believe that a budget should put needs before wants, put staff before stuff, be educationally sound and fiscally responsible, and exercise the principles of equity in allocation of resources. So our asks, we have a couple, and our first ask is for enhanced staffing in the early years. Primary teachers have been telling us all year that the needs in their classrooms are increasingly complex and additional supports are needed to help students adjust to school. Young students are struggling with self-regulation and violent incidents are increasing. So we are asking that wherever possible, staffing to support those students in those transitions is greatly appreciated. The other ask is increased staffing for Island Connect Ed, increased staffing to manageable caseloads. Our Island Connect teachers at the secondary level are facing caseloads of 300 or so students. The work of a distance education teacher is different than that of a traditional classroom, but it's not less work. So we would like to see staffing at a level that those teachers' caseloads are more manageable. We also ask for increased counselors with students who are struggling with mental health and with self-regulation. We look for additional supports for students and that our counselors provide an invaluable service. We're asking for staffing at levels. We know you're already staffing above the required ratio, but significantly above that ratio in order to, again, better supports, better ratios means increased supports for students. And similarly, we're looking at inclusion support teachers, again, staffing at levels significantly above the required ratio because like counselors, our inclusion support teachers provide an invaluable service for students who are needing additional supports. And again, better ratios mean increased supports and greater success for our students. So those are our big asks. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Joe. I'll just wait a second here and see if anyone has any questions. Chantel?
Hi, thank you, Joe, for your presentation. All things that we heard as well in the public consultation that we received. I'm just wondering to remind us all here, and folks watching at home or who will watch this later on, counselors. They do a lot of different things in our schools. Would you be able to remind us all about what some of the different roles are that they have, you know, elementary versus high school and things like that? Thank you.
Okay, sure. So one of the roles is case managing students who have additional needs in terms of mental health and behavior. So they provide those one-to-one supports. They also provide whole class support. This is at the elementary level I'm speaking to. Whole class supports with self-regulation, teaching specific programs to students. They're also there for students who are experiencing immediate crisis and getting them to referred through to the supports that they may need. So those are the three important roles and main roles that they play at the elementary level. At secondary, there's also a portion of the position, there's those roles, as well as they are doing programming for students. So they're helping students select appropriate courses, make sure that students are on track for graduation, encourage students who are struggling with school attendance to come to school, and to help students find pathways to success.
Follow-up question, if I may? Fantastic. Do they do any IEP management as well?
Yes, when I say case management, that's meaning the IEP. So those folks maintain a caseload of students who have specific designations for behavior and mental health, and they write and maintain IEPs. At the secondary level, each counselor has a caseload, which is a portion of the student population. So caseloads at the secondary level are in around the 400 level, give or take, depending on how many counselors are in the building. So each counselor is responsible for the students within their section of the alphabet in terms of programming and keeping an eye on progress.
Follow-up to the follow-up. And if I understand correctly, though, the counselors are also doing the IEPs in high school as well.
Correct.
So they don't have just the 400, they have also the students who are designated with
Yes.
certain designations. I believe it's the H and R, right?
Correct. In their
Right.
portion of the alphabet. Yes.
Okay. Oh, in their portion of the alphabet. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Chantel. Naomi?
Hi, Joe. Thanks for the presentation. So my question is around, you have described like the role of the high school counselor and the elementary. And I was wondering, at the high school, and I know you mentioned that one of the questions I was going to ask you answered, which is an average of around 400 students. I guess the question I wanted to ask was around, I also know that there's a lot of counselors, many of them are doing, they're doing a teaching course that's not required to be classroom. It's outside of the timetable, like grad transitions. Wondering if you know, like, how many actual, like, full-time just counselors doing just counseling in our high school system right now.
Just counseling?
Yeah.
No, not the grad transitions and
Yeah.
case management.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anybody. I think everybody has a portion of either grad transitions or case management or other pieces.
Okay, so how many are doing just case management and counseling?
I wouldn't know those numbers off the top of my head, Naomi, I'm sorry.
Okay.
but everybody has multiple responsibilities. It's not just counseling.
Okay. And I have another question. Is that okay? Because I don't see anybody on there. Yeah. So you talked about the early years and teachers requiring more supports, that there's a lot more complex needs. Can you elaborate on what you mean by specifically about supports at the early ages?
Sure. I think part of it would be, honestly, our QP colleagues having more EA time. Having an EA in every kindergarten classroom for the start of the year would be incredible, and I think that would make for a really successful transition. As somebody who's taught K1, having an EA in my room was invaluable in helping my students transition to school. And the other piece, of course, is inclusion support teachers. Increased time for those teachers means that they can provide increased supports to those early years classrooms. So, and then just, again, making the class size as low as possible. Again, adding more teachers to support more students is always to the students' benefit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't see anyone else with a question, but Joe, I would like to ask just if you know what our district staff's counselors at above contract language.
I'm sorry, Leanne, I don't know that off the top of my head either. I know it is above the ratio, but I don't know by how much. I would need to look at the numbers. Like it's changed over the years, but this district has always maintained a level above. Oh, Laura's put the number in the chat, but it's always maintained a number above the requirement of the collective agreement.
Okay, so I have another question about it. This might jump over to Laura a little bit, Joe, as well. Just when we're talking about counselors and you know, the need for extra counselors to support students. I'm wondering if there is a crossover between child, youth, family support workers providing some support for students in these areas as well. Because it seems like, from what I've heard, that sometimes a lot of students are going to these staffing members versus a counselor for specific needs or conversations.
Sure. I'm always going to advocate for more staff either way. I think adding more child and youth family support workers to the system is excellent. I think adding more counselors to the system. I know they work in tangent with each other. They work very closely. Child and youth family support workers have that added role of going directly to homes to see some of our students and supporting them in coming back to school. And then counselors have the role of providing a program for those students that that meets their needs. And so I feel that both persons are valuable to the system, and I would not want to choose one or the other. I say both, please.
Thanks, Joe. Laura, did you have something to add?
Through the chair, great summary, and I'll just emphasize, of course, that you know, when we think about a counselor with this caseload, that the needs, of course, of the students vary greatly, a portion of those requiring no support, and that in all schools, particularly at secondary schools, because they are quite a bit larger than our elementary schools, is there certainly is a team approach with many of those folks that have been mentioned already. The other thing that I think might be you know, helpful to include is that our new integrated child and youth teams, so our ICY teams, are now very present in our district. We've got a very close working relationship, and those folks are clinical counselors and are able to provide that clinical counseling support, which our school counselors, you know, are not able to do. So that's really rounded out a lot of the services that we're able to provide our students in the district as well.
Thanks so much, Laura. Does anyone else have any other questions for Joe? Not seeing any, so thank you, Joe, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And so we're going to move on to senior staff reports. So Secretary Treasurer Mark Walsh and Associate Secretary Treasurer Tanya Sutton are going to continue our preliminary annual budget discussion.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone, and good evening from sunny-ish Invermere, where I am today. Just wanted to take a moment. So we've seen these numbers kind of in generalities. We've been working to understand the assumptions that have led to our numbers. We had the specifics provided last week. And so I'm going to leave it to questions, and I'll address some of the issues that were raised a little bit earlier. But one thing I think that I don't want to let get by the public and trustees. So again, I'm going to kind of hit on the good news aspect that, you know, we're not in the position of other school districts in the sense of proposing resource cuts. Yes, there's an reallocation or two, but cuts, no. And that is partially because we have still not included a local capital transfer for the purposes of technology or any other purpose in the preliminary operating budget. And we're about to hear about Q3. And so our initial estimates that we're looking at some surplus again is there. So that's great, which means that, you know, we think that we're going to be in a position to be able to move funds. This is not going to be long-term unless there's additional funding to the system. But what I want to take a moment to do, and I'm going to do this with all of the respect in the world for our partners in other school districts and our partners at the Ministry of Education. But can folks see the shared screen that I've got here? Yep. So
Sorry, if you could increase the size just a little bit. You might have to like increase it and then scroll. I'm sorry.
yeah, so
Thank you.
I mean, this is a publicly accessible link that I can send out. So this is, and importantly, I want to go over the various aspects of the grant just for a second. So the predominant way that we're funded, and I'm sorry people know this, but I think it's important for it to be on the record. The predominant way that we're funded is the operating block. That's kind of the per student formula that's going to lead us to what we're getting. Obviously, there's some special aspects within that, but I think that that's pretty important. So pretty much, if you're got one student, they're worth, you know, 7,000, whatever that number is, then you times that by your number of students and you end up in that position. So you'll see, as an example, Surrey is almost $1 billion just in their operating fund. They have so many kids. On the island, you look at Nanaimo, 170,608,922, compared to Victoria, 230,854. Victoria is about 25% more students than us, and so that's, I think we did the math, it's 26% higher from an operating perspective. Great. That's, you know, not I know that equity doesn't mean equal, but this is one of those formulas that largely should probably be roughly equal across the system. But then you look at the next one, and that's the Classroom Enhancement Fund. And we are a district with relatively restrictive language, so that led to a significant amount of funding to support the return of students. But this is not corresponding with your FTE whatsoever. It's supposed to correspond with your language. And then you go down again and you compare. Let's just use Victoria again. Victoria is getting $21 million. We're getting $14 million. And I don't believe that's equivalent to 25%. Now, nor should it necessarily be, but, you know, when you think about in the scheme of things, funding based on population is something that people can understand. We look at community link funding. So that's supports to support vulnerable students. And we scroll down, and again, we look at Victoria with 4.2 and us with 2.6. Now, this is somewhat based off of the vulnerability, but how that's more than 25% as an example. And I'm not picking on the district, it's just one that's close to us and has many similar demographic issues. And so then you continue down the line, and then we'll look at pay equity as an example. And so you look at pay equity and you look at Victoria, gets $2.9 million. We get $160,000. Now, granted, we get much more in transportation funding than they do because they have very limited transportation funding. But all of that's to say, if you did the math, and I don't know if it's a worthwhile endeavor or not, and I don't take any other district, it doesn't matter. And you add up what Nanaimo is receiving in funding, and then you kind of apply that on a student by student basis, and particularly because of pay equity. I'm going to propose to you that we are one of the lowest funded districts in the province. And I don't know how to fix that. Beyond the pay equity issue, that would go a relatively far amount of space. So I don't mean to be negative because we are in a good position, but it's just doesn't sit right necessarily when you do those numbers. And so I don't know what the solution to that particularly is, but I do want it to be said in a public meeting. And again, pay equity particularly is just one of those areas. And I know our trustees know it, but for the people watching, what's happened is our school district in the early 90s realized that female-dominated jobs were underpaid compared to similar type jobs that were male-dominated. So secretaries and EAs were making less than custodians and grounds people, as an example. And our district spent its own money to fix that problem. And then the government in the 90s realized that this is an injustice, and everyone was required to fix the issue. And everyone sent the bill to what it would cost to fix that issue to the government. And in the early 2000s, they instituted payments to school districts, ranging from, you just saw Victoria with 3 million, and us, because we'd already done it, got punished. Not the government of today, not the current bureaucrats that work in the Ministry of Education and Childcare. I don't mean to suggest that there's fault, but when we're talking about some of the needs that our partners with the NDTA presented, some of the needs that our partners at CUPE presented, some of the needs to support the district strategic plan, that would make a difference. And it would have made a difference over the last 20 years as well. We're talking tens of millions of dollars. So overall, some good news, I think, for our budget. Very proud, very appreciative of the work that was done by the finance team to put it in, and very impressed with the focus of all of our departments to focus on the strategic plan. But all of that needed to be said. So I do want to just respond to the EA hour question, and Jeff largely responded. We agree with what the problem is. What happened was, in the last round of bargaining, we bargained a certain amount of money to go towards additional hours to EAs, not additional, not a guarantee of the that everyone gets an additional hour. And what happened is that when we did our summary, if someone goes on leave, so I've got an EA position and then I'm backfilled as an example, that's now another person with that additional hour. And so the pot of funds ends up being depleted prior, and we actually have a very healthy EA staffing in advance in the preliminary budget this year. So that pot of funds got depleted. And to Jeff's point, we're still talking about it internally, so the discussion is ongoing, but that is the gap. So the pot got depleted before we hit all of the EAs potentially impacted. So that's that particular issue. So with a happy and somewhat bittersweet note about the way that the funding allocations impact our district specifically, I'm happy to answer any questions. What I would say is that it is our goal for the board to debate. I know that the board does not have any interest in 3 readings at once. What we are hopeful is that if the Rutherford recommendation goes forward, we intend to have recommended motion with respect to first and second reading at the next available board meeting.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. Does anyone have any questions at this time? Greg?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, to staff. First to say thank you, Mark, for reminding us and those at home about the funding inequity, specifically with pay equity. I know that that's been one of our #1 advocacy actions that the board has undertaken, along with replacement of ND. So anytime we get the chance, I thank you for bringing that to our attention. My question is, with respect to the presentation this evening in relation to additional pay bump for hard to fill positions like HVAC, for example, could you speak to whether or not that's within, or it would be within the district's ability to provide a market adjustment to those specific positions?
So the district doesn't have the authority to do that unilaterally. BCPC would need to approve that. Like, we'd sit down, if we were going to go that direction with the union, we'd say, great, we're going to agree to this, but then we would need BCPC's approval, presumably PSEC's approval through BCPC as well.
And just as a follow-up, do you see, from staff's perspective, there being some value in having further conversations about that piece?
Through Chair, I certainly do, but depending on the nature of the position, but I don't know what HR is thinking with respect to that particular conversation. I do know that our mechanics are particularly problematic area to both attract and to maintain once we've attracted them. So I wouldn't say it would be off the table, particularly given, depending on the number of positions, we are not talking a significant amount.
May I have one follow-up to the follow-up, Leanne, or I'll put myself back on the list? So just in terms of the budget, could you advise us if it's possible to budget an amount in this budget for those discussions, with the assumption that we would do that sometime in the coming year?
So through you, Chair, what I would suggest, particularly given the, in the scheme of the budget, our low cost dollar amount, is that's the type of thing that I think that, this is preliminary in nature. So there's going to be ups, there's going to be downs in the scheme of our budget. And so we have changed. So again, we always talk about how if we had 10 more or 20 more kids come into school X, and our enrollment has now gone up by 20, we are putting a teacher there, which is going to impact the budget, and then the board ultimately approves that come next January at the amended annual time. So it's just like, if we got to 119 out of 120 people with that extra hour, would we find a way to find that extra hour for the 120th person? We would, without necessarily coming to the board. You just see the change in January. So I don't foresee a need for such a small number to have a budget adjustment in that way.
Thank you. I want to let Tanya go, but maybe I'll add myself back onto the list to ask another question about that topic.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm actually going to go back to Chantel.
Thank you. It's actually something I should have asked in the last meeting about it, but I didn't really like zone in on it. I think, and for that I apologize. It's about in here on page 24, it talks about purchase to mental health software platform Open Parachute. I'm wondering how much was that, and kind of like some of the data that we're going to be using from that as well to see if it's helping hit our board goal of student and employee wellness.
Sure. So I do not see Kirsten in the meeting. So we can certainly speak to the amount. As to the impact, I don't think we probably can immediately. What I will say, though, it is coming out of target funds. And so, but Tanya, you probably have the amount.
Actually, we ended up with a prorated amount because it was implemented partway through the year. So I think the cost this year, if memory serves, was I believe 35. The target funding is 51, and so I believe it is to be underneath that, but it will be very close to that target of 51. But we would have to circle back to the board to confirm that.
Okay, so what do you mean by targeted funds? So
This is the mental health grant.
The mental health grant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's under the mental health grant.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. That helps me a lot. Okay, I leave it up to Tanya. I don't have a follow-up question in regards to this one. Thank you.
All right, Tanya.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to just go back to one of the other things that Jeff brought up in his question. I just, out of a curiosity basis, if in the terms of the reorganization of what was community schools, and now we've got the one community school coordinator and the 4 other individuals, which I do think is a good model. I'm just wondering, what would be the cost per person, per employee, to have them 12 months employees versus 10?
So it's going to be position dependent. Tanya,
Okay.
perhaps I can just ask Tanya to give her a moment if you need some time, Tanya. Just not for 4 people, but just from a 10-month to a 12-month. Do you happen to have an approximate?
Yeah, it does depend on the position, but it could be about 10 to 12 to 14,000.
Okay. And I guess my follow-up question would be, from a collective agreement perspective, these are each individual positions. So we could say, if we were to say 30, I'm making a number up here, 30 hours a week for the 30 hours a week for the 10 months and 20 for the 2 months, is that legally within our rights to do through the collective agreement? And if I'm getting to HR, and I'm just curious. There's a reason I'm asking.
So through Chair, I don't quite understand the question. Like the board like assigning a certain set of hours to an individual position, I would say that wouldn't be the normal course of action.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking is, again, in my experience in the nonprofit sector, there have been times where what we had done is the job is through the school year, this many hours, and then in the summer it's this many hours. We can't do that, can we?
I cannot speak to whether we can do that specifically with respect to a single job. I believe that if we cut hours, like you go 30 to 20 and then back to 30, I think that would be a layoff, but I'm not certain. I'm not certain on that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to work some things through in my head. All right, that's all I was wondering for
now. Greg?
Yeah, thank you through you, Chair, to staff. I just wanted to sort of follow up on the last line of questions and with respect to the hard to fill positions like mechanics and HVAC technicians and so forth. Can you please help me understand, if this was something that the board wanted to see, what would be the most appropriate mechanism to bring that forward?
Sure. So if I guess I'm going to answer as transparently without answering, I think, as I possibly can. So I think probably what we would want to be doing is, given this would be a labor relations negotiation, number one, because, I think we heard from our partners that they're not going to say no, but, if we're negotiating an additional amount for an individual employee subsector or subgroup of an employee group, we would be negotiating that again with the union to begin with, and then to BCPC would have to approve it. So I think that the initial conversation probably has starts and closed with respect to that, to kind of answer those questions. Again, when we're looking at small numbers, I don't think the board needs to take a budgetary perspective to deal with that, right? And so maybe what we do is we invite HR director to come into a closed meeting and talk about that, if that makes sense. The one other thing, the one lever that we do have on occasion, and can be a double-edged sword, is our joint job evaluation committee. And so we take a look at the positions and we realize, oh, there's more responsibilities or more complexity than there was in the past, and we redo the job description, and then it goes through that process. But in some cases, it could end up with a lower rate. So that's not necessarily the best mechanism. It's just another mechanism. So perhaps what I would suggest is we bring it back to a closed. In the event that the board passes the budget, again, we're talking such limited kind of scope that I'm not sure that it would need to adjust the budget. It would just, any additional funds would appear in the amended annual.
Thank you, Mark. I'll have that conversation another time then. Thanks.
Can I just ask on that same topic then, Mark, is that conversation in general, made for us to advocate to BCPC that we can't be competitive, like we can't get employees if they're not going to properly fund the wage that the going rate is, like outside of the school district?
It certainly could be if we found something that was fundamentally important, and that the BCPC refused for whatever reason, and you could see them saying, well, wait a second, it's a wage increase, whether you call it something that's not a wage increase, it is a wage increase in between rounds of bargaining. There's often a difficulty to do that because it might have impact on other school districts. The other thing I would say too is we have bargaining coming up, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but in the last round, there was provincial table money for this kind of exact purpose, right? And so obviously the money wasn't huge, and obviously, we all have an interest in making sure that our employees all kind of benefit, not equally, but all get benefit from it. So, but we can, if the same scope arises, like say there's similar amount of table money next time, that could be a focus of the district as well, is focusing some of the table money on adjusting wage rates to impact hard to fill positions. But of course, that would be an agreement between the parties if that was the case.
Thanks, Mark. Chantel?
Hi, yes. Oh, darn. Had it here. Okay. Page 42, about the Community Link funding. I'm wondering, and I'm sure you've already told me, just to remind me here, of the 3.4 teacher FTE. Who are those teachers again? In the Community Link, it says 3.4 teacher FTE.
I am not certain. Tanya, maybe, do you know, or do we have to get back to the board?
Those are specialist teachers. I think there are vision and hearing teachers in there. Yeah, I believe they're hard of hearing, vision.
Okay, so it's those specialized teachers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Follow-up question, if I may, if you can remind me again, the CYSFWs are overseen by who? Oversees the CYS, sorry.
Laura, would you mind popping on just to confirm? I believe it's Kirsten.
Because I was wondering if they're connected, the 3.4 teacher FTE with the CYSFWs, but obviously they're not. So, I mean, they're connected, obviously. They're going to have very overlapping, like working with as a team sort of thing. But is there...
I'm not sure what you mean by connected. Like,
no.
So Kurt, oh.
Sorry, just wondering who's overseeing. Oh, sorry. My buttons are very, very tricky here with my video. So
Not to worry.
who's overseeing the 31
So-
CYSFWs?
So currently, because as you're aware, Learning Services is, you know, sort of switching up our structure. So this is going to change for next year, but currently it's Director of Instruction, Kirsten Funky Robinson.
That's right, and that's changing in the future. That's right. Okay, thank you very much for reminding me about that. That helps out a lot. It's hard to see kind of like that change and stuff like that. And hopefully those watching can understand, but I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it anyways in the future. So great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, last call for any other questions. Okay, I'm seeing none, so I think we're okay to move on to the next portion of this, which is our third quarter report.
Great.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. And before we leave the last one, I know the board has sent a number of letters and continues its advocacy work with respect to pay equity to time it along. So, you know, if there is additional potential advocacy, I don't know what that looks like, but certainly attached to the passage of the budget is never a bad thing. And if the ministry was to actually address it, the board needs to be kind of well in advance of them creating next year's budget. And, you know, if you're not done, if they're not making a change by December of next year, they're probably not making a change. And so just to be aware. So the Q3 report, so I think the board is very much used to seeing our quarterly reporting. And so the quarterly reporting largely is there to give us a sense of whether we are in a strong financial position, whether we're underspending in areas or overspending in areas, and dig a little bit deeper if we need, because obviously it's very high levels, some very large numbers. Recall, we are we're not a 10-month organization, but much of what we do happens in 10 rather than 12 months. And many of our employees are paid in 10 rather than 12 months as well. And so you'll see like our Q1, which starts in July, is relatively limited. And then obviously the quarters that were subsequent, particularly Q3, we're seeing significant expenditures. So we should be approximately about 70% through many of our expenditure lines. So the report outlines, we are in relatively good shape and consistent shape in our revenues and our expenditures, with a couple of really concerning outliers that really put us at risk in future years. And so you'll note the report talks about replacement costs being way ahead of where they should be. And so we are doing internal audits still to see if that's just error, but at this time we don't think so. We do think it's like a shift in the way that we do business. And so we've come out of COVID, people are encouraged to stay home. We hear about burnout. So, the idea of the board committing to employee wellness, I think, is very timely with respect to this, because if we continue to have the absentee rates that we have and the replacement cost rates that we have, we will end up cutting our budget to pay for TTOCs and replacement EAs. Now, replacement EAs, we do still continue to have trouble replacing them, particularly since we have so many EAs staffed this year. On the TTOC front, we've had, I think, a couple of days where we haven't had everybody, but we've done a pretty good job replacing them. So some good news there. But when we are so far ahead of our budget, and we thought we were kind of conservative in budgeting too much last year. So it's a a worrisome trend that's something that we're going to have to look into, and we're going to continue to report back to the board. So I've also noted our benefits costs. I mean, you aren't necessarily going to come out in this report, but I do want to highlight it again. Out of COVID, you couldn't go get that massage. Getting in to see specialists or paraprofessionals was very difficult. I think that the dam has burst, but the ability of people to access that supports has come, as well as the board and our BCPC rep, I think particularly, need to be very cognizant in the next round of bargaining that the costing with respect to the various proposals, and I guess I should say that very cognizant that that's actually fully funded. And what I mean by that is assume that at the provincial table, because we're not bargaining this with the teachers or at all, it's going to be BCPC and BCTF, assume that they agree to an enhancement in the benefits package and the government commits to paying for the entirety of bargaining. And all of a sudden, the benefits package costs more than they said it was going to. Well, then ultimately they're only going to fund what they said they were going to fund, and we are going to end up having to fund and find that difference. And so just alertness to that fact. I think every district across the province is looking at this with some grave concern, some for this year, I think, and like us, I would suggest more for next year. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the Q3. Largely, it's where we think it should be, with those couple of outliers as mentioned. And to note, we do believe at this time, barring some significant change in the last couple of months here, that we will be looking at a number that in September will come to the board and seek to do that local capital transfer that we're not asking to be in the preliminary budget. So as Jeff said, today's dollars for today's kids, don't create a deficit to fund a capital program when we have a surplus coming. So, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Just wait a minute here to see if anyone has any questions. It appears that there are no questions. So we can move on to 8.3, which is a Rutherford Elementary School.
Great, so thank you, Chair, and I just want to recognize Jackie Poulin is here, and Tanya is here as well, and again, thank you for her help on the budget and the Q3, but also their help on the Rutherford reopening recommendation. So you will see that there is a recommendation for the board, and to be clear, the recommendation is not to implement the set of recommendations, it's to send them for public consultation with the intention of having that public consultation open till the end of June. And then we would be coming back to the board in the early fall, likely bringing the working group back together. I want to recognize the working group. It was large. We had parents, we had staff, we had we had a variety of folks, and I want to express appreciation for the positive comments. I think there was a general recognition that this is not necessarily going to be an easy process, but people had great contributions. I also want to recognize at the get-go that some of these recommendations are not definitely not everyone I think in the group was completely comfortable with them, and I'll walk through that. So importantly, on page 70, we outlined essentially 7 priorities that we were trying to achieve with result to this process. So the long-term viability of Rutherford is a direct direction from the board, and the alleviation of Departure Bay, McGurr, and Randerson capacity issues. So that was our North Star with respect to the work that we had to do. Limit portable use in the North End, and ensure the short-term vibrancy of Rutherford, attempt to ensure safe and walkable catchments to the best of our ability, encourage an expedient decision of the board, rationalize North End and related catchments, and then ensure transparency and community consultation. And so we think we've met that. We've had some positive comments. Of course, the community is going to have a lot of questions. We're already being asked to come to the Rutherford PAC the Frank J. Nay PAC already. So leading into our discussions, and the recommendations follow those seven ideas. So first of all, we did work with the consultants to get a revised growth and expected enrollment projections to 2035 for the North End. Numbers are slightly softer given the result of some slowed down projects, as well as a little bit less student per dwelling. So now that we have 3 years of this data, what we're seeing is less kids being produced by certain types of housing types. That's across the board, but it's also particularly in the North End. We do still have some outliers that we're watching around Randerson. I'm sure everyone's seen the tons and tons of apartments going up. They're not all open yet, so we're going to get a quick check to see if kids are living in apartments yet in Nanaimo in a way that they haven't in the past, and that could change those numbers as well. We do note that we have met with developers in the North End, and we anticipate growth that's exceeding the numbers that we show in these reports. But in the reality is the Green Thumb development, as an example, developments up in the Oak Ridge area are not necessarily going to be fully fleshed out by 2035, and to rely on kids that are like 10 years out to do this exercise didn't feel realistic, because if we missed, if we put a whole bunch of Green Thumb kids theoretically that are going to exist in a decade's time into a school to make it vibrant, and they never appear, or they're not there for a decade, doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. So just to note. Some good news that we did get capital funding for Rutherford, so we're planning that, and I think the work will be moving ahead relatively soon. Just so you know, you will see election officials renting part of that facility, but that won't get in the way of the upgrades that we're going to be doing in advance of opening. And that's in addition to the board's money that's been set aside to get the school ready. I do also want to recognize that even in the maps that we've provided, we've already been kind of informed of a couple of odd lines, and we're very much open as part of the process of looking at individual requests or fixing little areas as needed. What we didn't want to do with the board, though, and with the group, is do all that work in advance. We think that can come in on an individual basis as part of the overall consultation process. So got tons of data with respect to what the capacity of the schools are, excluding portables, how many kids actually go there, students living in the catchment. And so you'll see on page 72, a great example is McGirr. So we have a school with a population or portables of 390 and a current FTE of 482. You'll see we've got current students living in the new catchment of 377. So McGirr has a significant amount of out of catchment student population, and we don't anticipate that trend is actually going to change. To be clear, we are not welcoming very many cross-boundary transfers. We're just not asking kids to leave if they move out of the area. It's just not something we've done as a district. And so it's important to note that, so we're building McGirr to be 377, so theoretically under capacity. We don't actually anticipate that number to ever materialize because of the ins and outs. And so McGirr is one of those schools you end up in and you don't really want to leave even when you move. So we do understand that it won't shrink perhaps as much as we'd want it to. Randerson is a bit of a similar dynamic in that regard. So all those numbers are there to be reviewed. And so when we looked at boundaries, you'll see Rutherford's capacity excluding portables is 340. We built it to exceed the current catchment, to exceed that number, but knowing that it's a mature area and it's not going to see a ton of development in the next 10 years. And so the population is actually set to decline a little bit, but assuming our capture rate is high for the in-catchment students, then we are in good stead to have it vibrant. So portable use is noted. These numbers are really going to support the limited use of portables. The question, of course, in the McGurr example is how much is it actually going to shrink? But we will start to close portables if these recommendations are approved. And Departure Bay, when I get to the next set of recommendations, we could theoretically lose all 5 almost immediately. We don't need to be that fast, but we could be that fast. So a major discussion point, and Jackie is here, is the idea of short-term vibrancy. And it's not just to, fill it up because we want to ensure that we made the right decision to have a bigger school, but it's got educational impacts, and it's really fundamental, and it'll be the most controversial part, I believe, of this entire presentation. And so I just asked Jackie if she could pop on and talk about that vibrancy and the importance of it.
Thank you, and through the chair. Yes, so we are talking about the vibrancy of Rutherford, and knowing that in order for that to happen, we need to have as large of a population as we can right from the start. Which is why we're recommending, when we get to the recommendations, and that we have as a mandatory move from some of our grades. We're saying K to 6. Mandatory so that we do make sure we get the numbers there. If we go to a voluntary one, we could end up with smaller numbers where we have classes that could have combined grades of upwards of 3 or 4 grades in one class. So in order to ensure that a class in a school has some sustainability and some vibrancy, we want to make sure we have enough students in each grade to be able to offer them opportunities, to ensure that they are working, with teachers, and wanting to just make sure that there's enough energy in that building to really move the school forward and build a community right from the start that will be their Rutherford community.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm sure by the end of the report, there'll be lots of questions for you, so I do appreciate you attending this evening. So attempting to ensure safe and walkable catchments, a couple things to note here. Just by the very nature of creating a new catchment right in that zone means that the walking distances are by their very nature going to get smaller. I will note there's a significant recommended change for the Departure Bay area that will have kids going essentially the same distance to get to Frank Ney. I note, though, that the current departure, the neighborhoods that are being proposed to be impacted by the shift in Departure Bay are already not walkable realistically. If anyone's ever driven Hammond Bay past Departure Bay, the sidewalks disappear, the turns in the hills, you do not see kids walking from Oak Ridge or Golden Oaks to Departure Bay. We've already talked to the city because this city is really great about making developers set aside little paths and stairs, and there's lots of connections that way. And in fact, over the next 10 years, we actually think that the changed catchment for Departure Bay is going to end up being closer. I know that's weird. How can land get closer? What's happening is there's development that's going to have a different connection in the Oak Ridge area that's going to flow closer to Frank Ney and actually make it walkable, and it will never be walkable to Departure Bay. So there's some positives in the medium term with respect to that issue at Departure Bay. We are talking about encouraging the expedient decision of the board. So we have a AP that says, we're going to typically set catchments by January. We'd like to make that well in advance. We have people that are going to be buying homes, making their long-term plans. And so the sooner the better. It also gives, the new principal of the school, Mike Lundeen, and, to the chance to start building that community the moment we know that where the community is actually going to be. So it also will give the principal of Frank Ney that same opportunity to start looking at to see what that looks like for the Departure Bay kids, who are the kind of second most impacted group. You'll see some rationalization in the north end. Solaire right now actually has, I think, the smallest population of in-catchment kids in the entire school district, and it's one of our smallest schools. So if not that we're slating to close any schools, it doesn't make sense to have schools that are overcrowded from a catchment perspective and not take this opportunity to slightly shift to enhance their future viability. And so there's some shifts at Solaire, Uplands, and Rock City that reflect future growth as well. And then, of course, the commitment to transparency. And again, I haven't had the chance to meet our new Executive Director of Communications, but in the event that the board passes this, we'll be getting together very, very, very quickly to talk about what this looks like. And importantly, we're putting our heads around the idea that we need to reach out not just to our internal communities, but there are future families that this is going to impact, and they need to have their opportunity to express concerns as well. So the recommendations: the catchments presented from McGirr, Randerson, Frankney, Departure Bay, Uplands, Solaire, Rutherford, and Rock City be instituted upon the final approval of the board following consultation to take effect January 2025. The catchments are on page 75, and the link on page 75 also allows individuals to scroll in to see exactly where those changes. And I will note again, if you look to the east of in the Stevenson Point area, you'll see the Golden Oaks and the Oak Ridge developments being shifted over to Nay, which is the kind of largest geographic shift we have in this proposal. Obviously, there's a lot of kids that are being impacted by the Rutherford boundary as well. Number 2, and this is the biggie. The students located in the new Rutherford and revised Frankney catchments be required to attend their catchment school as of September 2025, with the exception of students beginning grade 7 in 2025. So the thinking, again, as Jackie noted, is the need for vibrancy. I want to point out a potential inequity right at the get-go. What we're not asking for is the kids in the McGirr catchment, as an example, that don't live in the McGirr catchment to leave. We're asking the kids that would be in the new Rutherford catchment to attend Rutherford. So I just want to be very transparent about that. It would just cause so much instability, and sending kids back to Pleasant Valley is not going to help our capacity issues at all at some of these schools. And so there's one thing. And so you'll note, though, that we're only talking about 2 of the changes. So all the changes around Solaire and Rock City and Uplands, we're not suggesting a required transfer. The reason that we're suggesting it for the Departure Bay students that are impacted, because there's about 80 to 100 of them, is because then what we would end up doing is emptying Frankney. And so we'd now all of a sudden be in this position where Frankney with a new addition and Hammond Bay with a new addition are schools with empty space. Not only does that not make any sense, but it also will have a big impact on what Frankney looks like. And so we think that it's important that we address both issues. So that will be controversial, I do suspect. Number 3, the students required to attend their new catchment schools as of September 25 be given priority cross-boundary transfer in the event of sufficient space and staffing to support them. This was an attempt at trying to acknowledge some of the concerns of individuals that don't like the idea of the required transfer. And so, for instance, I want to stay at Departure Bay, but I'm now in the Golden Oaks neighborhood and I want to go back. You're going to apply for cross-boundary transfer. And in the event that there's space, we would allow you to be kind of front of the list with your cohort, probably others as well. To be realistic and as transparent as we can be, we're not talking a lot of space to be able to do that, though. We would not issue new teachers based on demand for cross-boundary. We would not open new classrooms for demand for cross-boundary. So theoretically, we could end up in a situation where Departure Bay has a closed portable and demand for kids to go to that school, and we do not open the portable and we do not staff it. So just to be very clear that it's not an automatic, the cross-boundary transfer piece. Number 4, the current enrolled Departure Bay students who are required to attend Frankney are provided access to Wellington Secondary if their sibling attends the school. We can say with confidence there's so much movement between secondaries that that's not going to be a problem to let any student in that particular circumstance get into it, because as you note, The secondaries are impacted because there's 100 kids from Departure Bay approximately that are going to end up in the Dover catchment in addition to being in the Frank-Ney catchment. And so no, we already have a lot of transfers in that zone to Dover Bay and vice versa, frankly. So, but we're confident that the high schools will be able to support some choice in that regard. You'll see the upgrading with Rutherford using minor capital funding already in the works. The bus route instituted to Frank-Ney following the closure of Rutherford be eliminated as of September 2025. So that's consistent with the transportation policy, but also for transparency. So, you know, you're not in the catchment anymore. You managed to get cross boundary transfer into Frank-Ney. We're not going to be driving you to school based off of that choice. So, I know I've spoken a lot. I'm very happy to answer some questions. And to keep in mind, the recommendation is to go to consultation to the end of June with a final decision, you know, maybe with adjustments in September, latest October is our goal.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone have any questions? Until
Other people just got to get faster at putting down in there. This was a lot of information. And I actually kind of wish I had like sat in or listened to some of those conversations, because as somebody who is still getting to know like the neighborhoods and stuff like that in Nanaimo, when people talk about certain areas, I'm just like, I don't know exactly where that is. But I trust you have all hammered this out quite a bit about the catchment. The map, I was kind of hoping to have a map that would be overlaid by another map that you could see like the change in the boundary. That would kind of make a really good visual. And if I could sort of maybe offer that as an option for the consultation for public, so they can kind of see sort of like where it's really changing sort of thing, right? Especially for those newcomers that have come in and they still don't know kind of the areas and things like that. I do have a point here, and I do have a question. And that is what do we need to break even on Rutherford? Like, what kind of enrollment do we need?
Well, the bad news is, through your chair. So first of all, we have the maps with respect to that can be overlaid. We just chose not to provide too much confusion in tonight's presentation, but we absolutely are able to do that. And then, so the bad news is that like all of the capacity that we're counting on is already there, right? Like, so these kids already exist. So we're going to have to count on increased enrollment throughout the district of, well, $600,000 worth of funding. So 300 odd kids, depending on the nature of how we split up the resources with respect to the schools that are there.
Sorry, I'm not fully understanding that answer.
Okay, so the board, so as it stands right now, the board is opening a school.
Yep.
And it's opening a school, and our initial recommendations are associated with kids that already exist.
Yes.
So the board already has every kid that's going to Rutherford is already funding something in the system. So
Right.
assume a school, and you know, depending on whose math you're going to use, is going to cost between, you know, $550 and $850 or whatever that number is, and then divide that by the number of kids that we need to support that 800,000 or 600. We'll pick a number, 700, 600,000 by the overall total. Tanya, could I get you to jump on and get your calculator? So we are talking about, what's their funding rate? 70.
Are we talking about the 9,000 per student?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you've got, if we bring in an extra about 60 students, we're looking at about 600,000, but that's before some of the supplementals. It's also fully contingent on where the students actually land after the transfer, and for relevance, if there are 20 divisions at Randerson currently, and there are 20 divisions at McGirr currently. Frank J. I believe there's 18, et cetera, et cetera. So the current landscape of schools will shift. So schools will right size somewhat. Hopefully what that looks like, we're still won't know at that time. Divisions would shift from Randerson, from McGirr, from Departure Bay over to Rutherford. So that would not be an increase in cost. That would be a transfer of teachers here and there. The additional students that fell outside of that, that would be new, would be the ones that would drive the additional resources that we would need to operate the school. So the clerical, the administration, those pieces, again, would some of the clerical transfer because that's formula based, and some schools have more now because they're above a particular threshold. If they drop down that below a threshold, will 5 hours or 10 hours or 15 hours from all of the surrounding schools transfer to Rutherford, mitigating that cost. So we've done a great deal of analysis of what this might look like, but the reality of what it's going to look like will depend on where everybody lands. And that we'll have to look at as we start to track that enrollment early in sort of the March and the April as we see what registration looks like. Not sure if that answers your question.
So Tanya, you're suggesting about 70 kids, assuming that it all kind of works, transferring other resources to the school, is the kind of need to cover the additional kind of sunk costs that are not transferable, principal,
Like
clerical,
electricity.
custodian. Yeah.
Yeah, all those.
Yeah, and again, it
gas.
would depend, but you know, I mean, 40 to 60 kids, I mean, that's going to generate your 600,000, you know, 400 to 600,000. We've put away the 600 for those sort of initial costs to get the school equipment up and all of the rest of the desks and the chairs and all of that. So that won't be an issue. It will be the actual staffing and ongoing operation. And again, whatever isn't transferred from alternate sites would be the impact going forward.
Okay. Thank you. I'll leave it to somebody else and more questions after. Thanks. Thank you.
Greg?
Yeah, just thank you. Just a quick question. Maybe I missed it, but was there a recommendation from the committee, or did the committee consider whether the school would open as Rutherford or as another name?
So the conversation was, and there was the idea that we could look at that in the future, but the preference is to maintain as it currently is as we go to open.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe I noted in the report as well, the board's already approved the expansion of pilot childcares, and we are targeting Rutherford as well to have before and after school care run by district staff upon its open.
Chantel, I think you have another question, but it's kind of amalgamated
Right.
with Tanya, but you go ahead and ask your question.
That was weird. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened there. My computer's doing some funny stuff here. You said in number 4 on page 74 about the average walk distance for students will decrease. However, the students being moved from Departure Bay to Frank J. Ney already do not have viable, safe walking routes. And then in number 6 on page 75, we talk about a bus route will be eliminated. What are we going to do in the meantime for those Departure Bay students who are going to be shifted to Frank J. Ney, you know, before the development happens and the better soft walking routes happen? Like, are we going to add a bus route? Are we shifting buses or? Yeah.
So the intention is no. I mean, we had the same argument with respect to Ney. That's there's a decent transit bus that would lead to Ney, number 1. We don't really have the resources for an independent one. People currently living in the Oak Ridge area can apply for transportation assistance because they are outside of the walk limits to both Wellington and to to Departure Bay, and that will be the same, I believe, at Nay, although once that road is finished, I believe they will be within the walk limit.
Okay, so there's a road that is very likely going in or is going in kind of thing.
Well, we've met with the developer, and of course, their timelines will vary based off of demand. So there will be very likely going in.
Okay. Interesting. So we're just taking off, if you don't mind, if I'm trying to clarify here that we're taking off a bus route, and not adding another bus route.
That's right. Yeah, and to be clear, that bus route is part of another route as it stands, and so it serves, like, it does multiple stops, and it serves to Dover, etc. But we're not proposing any additional on that side.
So, but there's 2 buses to Frank J. Nay, or for because you said that bus route goes to Dover and stuff like that.
Yeah, so the Frank J. Nay portion of it will stop.
Oh, okay, just a portion of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Lots to think about. I appreciate it. This is very complicated, and I can imagine it's very stressful for everybody involved to make this work for everybody. And I really appreciate the work been done on this, because it's not easy and it's pretty complicated for these areas. Thank you.
And Chair, can I just make one clarification as well? I just want to make sure it's very clear to everyone. With Trustee Morvay's last question about how many kids it would take to make Nay pay for itself, I don't mean 70 kids going, sorry, Rutherford. I don't mean 70 kids going to Rutherford is sufficient, because that doesn't make any sense as a school in an urban area. What I meant was 70 additional new enrollments is what creates the revenue to pay for the difference. So I just want to be clear, we're not suggesting that if we were faced with the board determining that we weren't going to require students to move or whatever, like, we'd probably be suggesting that we rethink the entire idea, to be honest, because if we're looking at an urban school under 150 or something like that to start, that's a tough thing. And that's where, again, the controversy, I'm glad I don't have to make that call.
So yeah, exactly. And that's like 70 more students within the whole district is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Tanya?
Thank you. All right, I have the motion here. Can you hear me? I've been having some tech issues, so. Yeah. That the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68 and Nanaimo Ladysmith improve in principle the Rutherford Working Group's reopening plan recommendations. The recommendations, including the redrawn boundaries and transfer of students in the newly created Rutherford and Frank J. boundaries, and send the recommendations to the community for consultation with final approval in the fall of 2024.
Thank you, Tanya. I see that Greg has seconded. Would you like to motivate?
Yes, thank you. I think that clearly a lot of thought has been put into this process. I also know that there's been a lot of emotion attached to Rutherford for years. So I think it is important that we hear the community, hear their concerns, make sure that if there are concerns, we have staff work to make sure that they're being addressed and answered. And the best way to do that is through our public engagement process. I think that one of the things that our district has done well in the last number of years is our attempts to engage with the public and really listen and try to take into account the feedback and concerns of the public. So it's important that we maintain that commitment.
Thank you, Tanya. Is there anyone else that has any discussion on this? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, if you are opposed to the recommended motion as read by Tanya, please type it in the chat. All right, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, moving on to 8.4. Mark again, talking about Administrative Procedure 344 Code of Conduct.
Great, thank you, Chair. So this is an exercise in compliance, just to be clear from the get-go. So in your agendas, you will see change ministerial order with respect to the provincial standards for codes of conduct that requires certain issues associated with cell phones and technology to be included in codes. And I understand that as of July 1, this is the requirement. So what we thought is we will include kind of verbatim the requirements of the changes to the ministerial order. However, this is just the beginning of the conversation. So since it only came out 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, to have a fulsome discussion and talk to principals and talk to our stakeholders and talk to everyone about how we might change it to meet the needs of our district generally, that's going to take far more time than July 1, and we just didn't want to not be compliant with respect to the requirements of the ministerial order. So the changes are there for you to see.
Thanks, Mark. I just appreciate the openness with this one to actually have a fulsome conversation with everyone involved before we make a blanket decision on this. Chantel, you have a comment?
Yes, it's in regards to well, this is the AP, the Code of Conduct, and it's just the start of it, and we're doing a whole policy review in the policy committee, and some of that will be coming forward shortly. So it's part of a larger body of work, and I really appreciate the quickness that staff have like sort of thrown that in there, and it's good stuff. There's just one thing I would ask, and it's the language on page 80 of 85. And since we're doing a little change up, if we could change it from students with disability, students with special needs to students with disabilities and diverse abilities, that would be great if we could just update that language in our code of conduct for now. Be super awesome. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chantel. Does anyone else have any comments? Mark, I see that there is no motion attached to this.
No, APs are for information to the board.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, and just maybe I'll just give a little bit of background context as well. As often what happens with the ministry is they will say, when they come up with something like this, and it's the same thing actually when the code of conduct that was mainly associated with sexual identity and orientation, when the initial code order came out, the ministry says we want a like every district needs a policy, and when they say policy, they mean policy or AP. That's the nature of their wording is slightly different than we act. So just to be clear, this is compliant. So if you see that the district must have a policy, this is very clearly compliant, and that's been confirmed by the ministry.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. No other comments, so I'm going to move on to number 9. There's no correspondence referred from the regular board meeting. No unfinished business, no new business, no for information. Karen, are there any questions?
No questions.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Naomi? Seconded by Greg. If you are opposed to adjourning and enjoying what should be a fantastic sunset, can you type it in the chat? All right. Well, we are adjourned. Have a great evening and thanks for joining us.